Item F6, discuss and consider amendments to the Sachse Economic Development Corporation bylaws.
Just open discussion, or is there a lead into it?
Well, I think we wanted to bring this forward to discuss the bylaws and just some of the discussion that we've had. There was some interest in just seeing what those bylaws were and how they were, how some of them read, and there were some questions, I guess, about.
Mayor, I can start if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, as the council knows, twice a year we evaluate the city manager, and one of the things that came out of the most recent discussion we had with Ms. Nash is her responsibilities and her duties. And as we always do, we talk to her about what those duties are and what she feels like is what she likes to do and what she doesn't like to be part of her job and things like that. One of the discussions that came out of this was maybe expanding her duties. And one of those expansions would be being over the EDC. In other words, the EDC would be reporting to her. I thought that was a good idea. I know there's been some discussion about that. When we hired Ms. Nash, one of the things that she talked about was her experience in EDC in the past. And so I know there's been some discussion about it. I know we'll have some more discussion about it tonight, but the short of it is I would like to see that ultimately the EDC department report to the city manager. And with that, I'll let someone else talk.
I think it's definitely. No, I'm good. It's definitely worth exploring. I've talked to a few people I know in other cities, and they've been pleased with that hierarchy, having EDC report up to the city manager. There's seems to be a unification feel, a shared mission feel, that sort of thing. Definitely something I think is worth exploring. One of my major concerns was overloading Ms. Nash, and I'm comfortable that by doing that, we're not going to be overloading.
I was going to say, I know we all have individual discussions with Ms. Nash about a lot of things, and I certainly don't get that impression that if EDC was reporting to her, I don't see that being a problem. But she can speak for herself.
But my thought is it's definitely worth something, definitely worth exploring. You mentioned that it came up in some of the past discussions with Ms. Nash during in this last year, but I've actually heard this idea tossed around for years. So it's not something that is just hitting the forefront right now. It's something that I think has been around for a while, and we're kind of letting things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to bring up. And, it's hard to start somewhere. And yes, certainly don't want the impression that this is something that was thought about yesterday. You're right. It has been some discussion out there for a while. And, and again, I think that, the experience that Ms. Nash brings, I think it'd be great for the EDC and for the city. I really do. That's why it's, quite frankly, that's why it's on the agenda for discussion tonight.
I'll hush up.
Some of the questions I have is, how would it change the EDC board role fundamentally? Like, for example, earlier we were talking about EDC financing, or sponsoring the fireworks or Christmas extravaganza. Does that now just become a council action that council just passes that is ultimately pass that money? I know right now we do have a qualification if something's over 10,000, I believe that comes to council though, but could it still be left in its form to where the EDC board members are still making the decisions ultimately over who is getting the grants and other requests that come before them?
Yeah, and if I'm speaking out of turn, I'm sure I'll be corrected. But my understanding is by making these types of changes, I guess there's really two things here. One is the board would become more like the rest of our boards. a true advisory board. I don't think from a day-to-day standpoint their discussions would change a whole lot because, like you said, they really can't approve anything without our ultimate approval. So I don't think that would change a whole lot. And then the other part of it, structure-wise, is of course the executive director would report to city manager, and so. But I think as a board, they're still going to have discussion. They still got tax implications, and it would come to the council. It would just be more of a true. And again, I'm sure if I'm speaking out of turn, someone will tell me, but I feel like that their fundamental role as a board would not change. It's just that they would be more of a true advisory board, and they wouldn't have staff responsibilities and things like that.
So you say advisory board, so I was just thinking, like from planning and zoning is, it used to be all preliminary plats needed to come before council for approval. And then that changed. Planning and zoning was given that power. So I would imagine we could write this up however we really wanted to so that there's that separation, because an advisory board, I think of like, the parks where all the recommendations are forwarded to council, but ultimately it's whatever council wants to do. So there's a separation that we currently have, and we do this with the MDC, and that's really, I guess, what I'm trying to compare it with. And I'm sorry, the MDD rather. Yeah. But you've got choices being made with taxpayer money, and so is it a separate board that should be making those choices, or is it ultimately the council that oversees it?
Well, I mean, to hopefully answer your question, I think it is. I think it still would be a separate board, and ultimately, nothing has changed in the sense that the council would still ultimately make that decision. We ultimately make that decision now.
At the $10,000 mark.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. But me personally, I don't see that as a fundamental change, but I guess you could definitely, the structure would definitely change. That's for sure. But I think at the end of the day, their function would still be the same. But that's my take on it.
Okay. And just kind of like final thing that I was pondering, it's like, essentially how the EDC is set up right now is very much how like it is for council members. So technically Gina reports to, she's got 7 different bosses, which I don't know how city managers keep up with all that, but she takes the time, meets with us every month, and technically we steer her direction. So and right now up to this point, EDC has essentially functioned exactly the same. Instead of somebody being elected, they're appointed, but essentially Leslin right now is reporting to those 7 people and not reporting to anybody within the city. So she's really at the sole direction, and essentially the mayor right now is the president of that board. Is that, have I explained it?
No, well, you everything but the mayor part. The EDC has a president that is that I guess you could say function like a mayor would for a council, if that's what you meant.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so the way I would see it, and again, this is my take on it, but I would see it as, the board being a more traditional advisory board, but their function's still the same. But the bylaws would have to be amended to make sure that either the city manager or her designee, in this case, designee is in charge of it, as opposed to the board hiring that position, would also be the city manager.
Right. So currently, the Leslin takes direction from the board. From the board, on there. She could not even, if she so chooses to, in a crazy scenario, Gina's not truly part of her daily life. Obviously, it's essential that they partner up, though. But right now, all that direction comes from the board, on paper anyway.
Yeah.
So, but you have volunteers, 7 volunteers that are rotating in and out. I guess the same as council members, but were elected. But it seems like I don't know how 7 volunteers are supposed to come together to be able to provide that day-to-day direction on there. So is that what's kind of prompting this change? Is it just?
Yeah, I think that might be part of it. And again, I'm just speaking for me, and we haven't heard from the rest of our cohorts, but that's an argument I would make as well. It's a unique, the way it's set up right now with the bylaws, it's definitely a unique board. MDD's unique in a different way, but it's one of those things to where, to answer your previous scenario, on paper, you're right. the executive director of the EDC does not report to the city. The way it is right now, it does not report to the city manager. The city manager has no authority to direct the executive director to do anything. And so, as Councilman King mentioned, you can go to several different cities and you see it like we have it right now. You also see it like what's being proposed, at least by me, is that it be underneath the umbrella, if you will, of the city manager, because of really what you just said, is that instead of putting the ultimate responsibility on 7 volunteers, you're, as far as best practices, things like that, budgets and so forth, in my opinion, it should be under the city manager, who has, because of the title and responsibility she holds. I think that's the right thing to do, but that's me.
All right. That's all the questions I got. Thanks for catching me up. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no. But I'm just, I'm 1 of 7.
Not having been involved in it over years, my first gut feeling is I like the autonomy of the EDC, and their goal and mission should be to help in the economic development of our community. And I think this gives them some flexibility that otherwise they may not feel like they have. Looking at some of the homework we were given, one little bitty thing that I look at, and I'm one of those guys that looks at trash in the corner. As an example, our quorum requires 4 out of 7. But then to spend money, it only takes a majority of the quorum. So in essence, 3 people out of 7 on the board can spend money up to $10,000 that isn't questioned. I think we need to look at that. Our Board of Adjustments, it requires at least 4 of the 7 people, regardless of how many's at the meeting, to vote on it, to prove it. And little things like that, I think, are some areas that we really need to look at that would make the general public feel a lot more comfortable with the autonomy that they have. And I'm not saying anything was ever done wrong. I don't know if there was or not. But those are little housekeeping things that I think we really need to look at up front.
Yeah, and Molly, I understand completely what you're saying, Councilman Millsap. I think that, in my opinion, I think as far as housekeeping and things like that, again, I feel like if in my opinion, ultimately the buck stops with Gina on our day-to-day operations of the city. I just don't think the EDC should be any different. I think it should be, she should ultimately be responsible for that as well. So.
Well, I will speak in a little bit different tone. Is it seems like every big decision the EDC is involved in, it's with the city manager and or council, whether it be a large incentive, whether it be a large project the city manager and or the council is involved in, whether being given direction, whether approving an expense. So just to me, this kind of streamlines things. I guess that's the best way I can describe it, that it makes sense for me. As it seems like there's a lot of redundancy. Under the $10,000, I guess as far as incentives or expenses, we're truly involved in, but it seems like a lot of it comes to us anyway for final approval, or just, hey, is this the direction that council thinks is right, or is this the right direction we're going in, type thing. So this may alleviate some of that, and then it'll alleviate some of the back and forth between EDC and Gina. I don't think it'll streamline a lot better.
I think it could also, improve some of the coordination between what's happening at the development at the city level and at the EDC, like particularly with the station and things like that in the future. This is not accountability is not the right word. I like the idea of having a little more direct say over some of we have a direct say, but if they're reporting to the city manager and the city manager is reporting to the council, there's a little more, that channel is a little more direct and not quite with, you hit the executive or hit the board of the EDC and you spread it out. And it's a little hard to steer the ship through a volunteer board. And I think maybe we just need some better direction and some, it's money that we're collecting from the taxpayers that we owe them something to show for this money that's getting spent and used. And I'm not sure we're doing that very effectively right now without a little more direct oversight on the day-to-day and what's happening. And those are my 2 cents.
So for this to happen, what in the bylaws needs to be looked at and changed?
Well, I know that we would need to change the section of the bylaws regarding officers and executive officers. And in essence, what it would mean is we would, again, my understanding, I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, is that the way I would, if the council concurs, the way I would propose it would be that the city manager or her designee be over the day-to-day operations of the EDC. That takes that responsibility away from the board, our volunteer board. They don't have that responsibility anymore. They don't have that burden, quite frankly. And really, at this point, as Councilman Howard said, the day-to-day operations of the EDC, whether it's through Gina or her designee, falls under the city, day-to-day city operation. And I think that's the best way to go at this point.
So the decisions that the board makes would be their power to make those decisions. Would the hiring of a director be under the board or under the city?
Well, the way I would propose it would be under the city, and specifically the city manager.
And that would need to be changed in the bylaws.
Correct. That's my proposal.
Any comment on the structure?
Just as the park board does not hire the park director and so forth down the line. Is that kind of where you're going, Jeff?
Yes. And ironically, you mentioned the park board. That's what I thought about for a while now, is that yes, there are some fundamental differences between the EDC and the park board, mainly because of the tax implications. But I think that, Lance is not the final say. If you take that example, Lance is not the final say on all things park. It's run through, in this case, Gina. And that's the park board, the animal control board, those type boards. It's all ultimately run through the city manager. And so, as Councilman Howarth, again, I'll steal her line, is that I feel like that if it's structured this way to where everything funnels through, the whole operations of the department funnel through Gina, I think that's the most efficient way to do it. And I think it's the best way to be accountable to the residents that pay their taxes for it.
So this being a 4B sales tax board, it has to be separate from the city, correct?
I'm sure someone will answer that.
Okay, then the original board created the bylaws. So in this bylaw, the boards would not be creating the bylaws. Would it be the city?
Well, I mean, that's a good question.
If I can jump in real quick, Councilman. I think we treat this kind of like we did the MDD. Gina, can you tell me if that would work? I mean, we have a financial board within the MDD. They have spending power, but ultimately they report to the city manager or the council, if you will, but they report to the city. This would be the same way to me.
Yes.
That's the way I was understanding it. Is
I think that's a better comparison than parks or something.
Well, you brought it up.
Is the EDC really
Because
a board? I thought they were a corporation.
They are a corporation.
Okay, so that leaves some questions to be answered. How would we liquidate the corporation to dispose of it to get it back to a board within the city?
Well,
that might be some homework that needs to be done. I'm not saying yes or no at this time. But those are some things that do open up some questions of how.
Well, my again, this is my thought, is that the corporation would stay just like it is structure wise, but the person, if we had an executive director at the EDC under this format, then that person would report to city manager. I don't know that anything else about the corporation structure would change. Now that's the way I understand it, but I could be wrong.
The board would vote and make their own decisions, and then they would go to a director, and if there's no director, they would go directly to the city manager of the board, or would they go through a director if there's a director?
Well, if there's an executive director, they go through them, but that'd be under my proposal, that would be the city manager's call.
I still feel like the board will make their evaluations and their recommendations to the director of the EDC. Now, that director would then report to the city manager, but my vision is we would still have a director of the EDC who would be doing the legwork, because to put the full function of the EDC where Gina and the designee does everything might be a little much for the city manager office. I'm still thinking there's still got to be a director of the EDC.
Well, and like I said, all I'm saying is that person reports to the city manager.
Yes, no, I agree that's definitely a feasible idea to look at.
And that would be, again, if I had the magic pen, that would be the change to the bylaw that I would recommend.
So with that being said, what do we need to do? What action do we need to take rather than just keep?
Well,
talk to lawyers and ask them.
Being the liaison to the EDC, I have done some homework, and so when you look at the bylaws, Article 4, Section 2 talks about this, and my proposal would be that the wording be changed, and Mr. Gorfita gave me anyway some thoughts, is that the simple way to put it is that I'll just read his wording. The city manager or city manager's designee shall serve as the executive director of the corporation.
Okay, that's exactly what I needed, because this is a discuss and consider amendment item. So it's not just a discussion item. So what would be the consider? Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, and I probably should start with that. I mean, if you want to bullet, again, this is my take on it. If you want to bullet down, that's what we would be changing in the bylaws.
So would
and that's where, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was thinking, would the city then have the power to hire the director, or would it still go on the board?
Well, when you say city, I say city manager.
City manager, you're right.
Yeah.
Where would that lie?
If it's changed like this is proposed, it would lie with the city manager.
The board would not be hiring their own director anymore. It would be the city manager.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I would understand it too.
Yeah. Okay. That's the way it possibly could be proposed, and that's what I propose we do. Obviously, there's room for discussion about that, but like I said, and to cut through the chase for everything, I just felt like it was important to say those other things because of background. But at the end of the day, and I'll say it again, the city manager or the city manager's designee shall serve as the executive director. That's what I would like to see happen.
So I think we're getting further down the road than we need to be. I mean, all we're trying to do is think that if this needs to be under the city manager or not. We're not disassembling or doing anything to the corporation. We're not changing the functions of the board. We're either recommending the EDC change the bylaws to report to the city manager, or we're not.
They are changing the functions of the board. The board would not be hiring a director anymore.
Not in this bylaw.
So in that
this bylaw is just putting the city manager in charge or not.
Yeah. Well,
report to or not.
Right, and I guess that's a good point. And my clarification, though, I guess the corollary to what I just said is actually with what the mayor was saying is that because the city manager or her designee will serve as the executive director, that takes the board out of it. They would no longer do that. Again, the way I see it.
But we're not changing the bylaws to specifically say that. We're just saying that the city manager will now, or the EDC board will now report to the city manager.
Yes.
The city manager can make all decisions.
And by extension.
And then you get into the detail.
I would like to see us put this on for further discussion at a later time and to give time to, I'd like to have time to go talk to some citizens that feels like one of the values of the EDC, it has some autonomy in looking at economic opportunities rather than what would be implied. And I'm not saying Gene is going to tell the director what to do by any means, but they would feel obligated to do that because if somebody's your boss, you better run your decisions by your boss before you make too many of them. I'd like to have some time to visit with some citizens to think about that, because I think it's important that it not just us makes the decisions. We talk to the citizens that approved it and allowed it to happen to start with.
And what would be the question to ask the citizen?
Do what?
What would be the question you would ask citizens?
I would ask them what they think about putting it directly under the city administration instead of having the autonomy to go out and look. And I think there's some opportunities that we've missed over the years, and no need to discuss them, but it has nothing to do with the people that are there now. But we need to look at this as what it is, economic development, and not make a decision as to where we're going today, and let the community have a more implied input into it than what we're implying that they might have under this new direction.
Yeah, I agree somewhat with Councilman Millsap here, maybe not for the exact same reasons, but I look at this agenda item, and as a citizen, I see that, yeah, there's some discussion about some bylaws, but what we're talking about here is a pretty substantial change in those bylaws, and I'm not sure that we're giving citizens the opportunity to really weigh in. I think the average person looking at these bylaws, aren't going to grasp or aren't going to pull out that we're making this kind of structure change. I would be fine with continuing this as a consider item, or maybe not continuing this item, but having this on another agenda with a little more discussion, a little opportunity, as Frank says, to maybe, if people want to weigh in on it, now that they know what the consideration is, we probably want to take some input from the EDC. As far as the idea, I'm relatively comfortable with moving the EDC under the city manager. I'm just not sure that we're giving our citizens the opportunity to weigh in on the item that they probably couldn't have extrapolated out of what we put in there. Does that make sense?
Well, if we're going to do it, we need to have a plan to reach
Agreed.
the citizens and
Agreed.
figure out what their answer is.
Right, and I think there's been some really good discussion, some really good questions tonight. I think a bulleted presentation could be put together about that plan. Get some verbiage, i.e. what Councilman Bickerstaff has, that can be transmitted to citizens so that they know what we're talking about doing. And then making it a consider item then. I feel like that if I was average citizen out there looking at the city council agenda, I would not have extrapolated out this type of hierarchy change from that discussion. Again, I'm pretty comfortable with moving on this. I'm just want to make sure that our citizens are also.
I am comfortable moving on this as well. The 5 people I talked to about this, none of them were on the EDC board because I know they know what the EDC does. But the 5 people I talked to about this that weren't on the EDC board just assumed it was already this way. They didn't assume they had individual power. So I don't think that's going to be functional. I don't think we're going to learn anything from it. I could be totally wrong, but yeah, I'm comfortable with doing this as well, as Councilman King said. So I don't know that we need to put this off, and we seem to kick some things down the road, and I think this is what we're doing. It seemed like from the discussion, we all think it's a good idea, but then we want to wait.
No, and let me clarify. It is not necessarily that I think we're going to learn a whole lot, because I totally agree with you. I think most people probably already think it's this way. My concern is that the agenda item, I don't think gives enough information that this type of hierarchy change, even though it's totally legal and it's a great agenda item, I don't think it gives the impact of what we're talking about doing.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what Councilman King is saying there. It needs to have a properly titled agenda item to know what action specifically is being taken. But let's just say for consideration purposes, we wanted to move forward tonight. How do we, this is similar to like an ordinance. We don't have an ordinance, before us. We don't have the exact text. We can't come up with the text on our own because I know it's going to need legal review. So it seems to me that there's no way to actually decide this tonight. That our consider is really to have our city attorney draft these changes based on our recommendations tonight, and it comes back before us, and then we're reviewing the changes to the bylaws.
I think you just answered it.
Yeah, I think so, and plus the fact it's getting bedtime for no man.
Well, wait a minute. You
just wait.
You signed up for this.
You did not bring your sleeping bag?
You're not going to get a lot of sympathy for that one.
We've had 1 to 2 o'clock nights. We can make this one happen. Yeah.
We've gone later than that.
Sorry about that. You better get sleep on. You better be sleeping on Sunday night.
Yeah.
So I say we bring this back next meeting. In between now and next meeting, everybody talk to citizens, see what they think. Any other ideas?
Before the next meeting, we get the bylaws drafted.
Thank you.
From the city attorney. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this is how it would be if we decide to move forward.
Okay, and what are the bylaws we want drafted?
That the city manager
being...
That the director of the EDC reports to the city manager.
Okay.
Right, and possibly if it's a good idea, maybe Joe comes to that meeting and has a couple of options here. Here's the direction you give me, so I could put it together this way, or I could put it together this way. So I
suspect if other cities do it this way, that there's a set way of doing this. We just don't know what it is.
And we may need Pete, because he's pretty much the EDC expert over there.
Yeah,
he costs more.
If the agenda item said, consider changing bylaws as it regards to administrative reporting or something along those lines, it wouldn't have to go into a lot of detail. Just
when this was written up, the
we didn't know.
City didn't know what to put.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
You
wouldn't have known what to put.
No, this meeting is very valuable, and it accomplished, I think, what it was intended to accomplish. Now we take the next step, but we just add a little more detail to it.
It does say discuss.
Right.
And
absolutely. No, this is absolutely what we should have done to take this trail.
And just to clarify the need of the attorney, if you go to them to get this drafted, and this is just super clear cut and doesn't really need any more discussion, then I'm good with not having them in the meeting. But if we get in here and in order to change the bylaws ends up having all these other questions or ways that we can draft it, then I think it's our best interest.
We could have him here. He'll be here on Zoom. I mean,
he's always on call.
We could get the attorney here. That would be a problem.
All right.
Yeah, and as I mentioned a while ago, I think the bylaws, the administration and management of it is organization of its charter, details are different. But like I say, right now, 3 people out of 7 on the board can spend $10,000 multiple times. And those are types of bylaws that I also think we need to look at, as well as if we want to go look at who answers to who. That's one thing, but we need to go back and look at some of the other bylaws that's inside there as we talk to the lawyer and make sure that we know what we're allowing and not allowing.
Can you just send your concerns to Gina
Sure.
individually as
Sure.
to what bylaws you want looked at?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, Frank, just to clarify, are you talking about the EDC or are you talking about us?
Well, I think in this case, we're discussing EDC bylaws.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we hadn't changed.
Because we're looking at Sachse Economic Development Corporation's
Yes, sir.
bylaws
Right.
is the title of the discussion topic.
Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you were
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get this brought back. In the meantime, if you're out or you're where you can talk to folks.
Okay.
All right. Any other on this item? Item F6,